Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming here today, and I will do my very best not to waste your time. So this talk is about ASP.NET and mobile. I talk a little bit about ASP.NET MVC and show some code samples. It's not specific necessarily to ASP.NET. I talk more about mobile, so if you're not into ASP.NET, that's okay. My name is Scott Hanselman, and I work on the Azure and ASP.NET teams. I work in Portland, Oregon, which is not in Seattle. Seattle is where Microsoft is. I live about 4 hours south, safely outside the Redmond reality distortion field. Actually, at work from my home, which has been pretty cool. So we all agree that mobile is a big deal. It's huge. Sometimes people don't realize, though, how big and how fast mobile is getting, and I'll talk a little bit about that. There are, in fact, 1 billion mobile subscriptions, and that's a stupid large amount. 1 billion means effectively 1 for every 7 people on the planet. That's interesting, but you might say, well, that's only 1 out of 7. But what's really more interesting about that is that there are a number of people by which they are only using their mobile device to get on the web. This is really interesting because in emerging economies, people have skipped things that the Western world didn't have to skip. So, we had some wars, and we built some railroads, and we had wars, and we built sewer and water and things like that. But there are some countries in the world where people have no running water in their house, they have no electricity, but they have a mobile phone. They actually have never had copper wires running to their houses. I have relatives in my family who have never had a landline, because a landline would be expensive. They have a mobile phone. They don't have a computer, and they don't have internet at their house, but they do have a mobile phone. Mobile-only web users are becoming a huge deal. There are at least 1/4 of the people in the US that do not use computers and instead only use their mobile device. And by mobile device, I mean, small phone, big phone, small tablet, fat tablet, anything from 4 to 10 inches, that you can fit in your pocket if you have a really big pocket. But in places like Egypt and emerging countries, and third world, I don't like that word, but places that have bypassed some development and have jumped over, like India and Egypt, they don't have computers. They have pocket supercomputers. So you have to ask yourself, what happens when a potential person who might be doing business with you visits your website with their mobile device? What does that look like? And keep in mind also that 1/3 of China is like all of Europe and all of the US and all combined. So it's a lot of people. And there is nothing worse than the feeling of visiting someone's website on a mobile device and having it be crappy. I mean, I think we've all had that experience where we visited somewhere and saw, I'm never going back. There's basically 2 things that you can do to make me hate you. Have no mobile site at all, no mobile experience, or I'm going somewhere to a specific link and you stop me and say, download our crappy application. And I say, no, thanks. I really just want to kind of go where I was going. I was in the middle of an HTTP GET, if you wouldn't mind. I don't want to be redirected to the App Store. Okay, fine. I won't bother you again. Check. Don't bother me again. And where do I end up? I end up on the home page of their crappy mobile site, even though I asked for a deep link. Isn't it great, the innovation that we've seen after the iPhone in mobile phone design? I think that it's fantastic. That the amount of innovation is extraordinary, truly. Okay, so what can we do as people who own websites, who run websites, who design websites? Well, this is my belief. This is 3 official things that you can do, and these are totally valid. First, do nothing. This is a business decision you could make. I'm going to do nothing, and I'm going to hope that mobile browsers get better. Because if you maybe have a really slow development process, maybe you like to tell yourself that you're Scrum, but you're really Scrummerfall. We're doing waterfall, but we do it very Scrummy. And the project for the mobile site will be done in 18 months. Well, 18 months from now, we'll all have like 8-processor, 7-inch Android phones, and those will probably have really good browsers. So do nothing, mobile browsers will get better. That could be the answer. I could change the client-side code. I could actually change the HTML and use things like adaptive design or responsive design to change my site without having to rewrite my site. That is one way you do, changing the client side to adapt. There's lots of room if you want to. I have like all this extra space here, by the way. If you want to have a seat on the floor, I'm more than happy to enjoy guys who are standing on the stairs. Or you could target mobile directly. You could actually change the server, detect the mobile device, and then do something about it there. So these are the things you can do. Nothing, change the client, change the server. This is what happens if you do nothing. So this is Phil Hack, as a friend of mine who now works for GitHub. This is his blog on a mobile simulator. So what's the very first thing that you're going to do when you visit a site like that, other than blow into a rage and start yelling? And you're going to go like that, exactly. You're going to tap, and you're going to zoom in like that, right? And I don't have a touch screen, although I do sometimes just move my face forward, which makes me feel like I've got like a surface, which is cool. So you're going to tap. Well, that changes the viewport. I don't care about this crap. I want to see this part here. So I could set what's called a viewport tag. It's a meta tag that you set in your HTML. This is the least possible amount of work that you could do. You could go to your existing website right now, probably, and add a view. See, I didn't even do it for my slide there. There we go. You could just set the viewport tag and then have the tap be implied. You're not actually changing the site. You're not changing the flow of the site. You're just zooming in for them initially. Small thing, one line of code, but I appreciate that line of code, and I appreciate people who do it because it's saying they at least recognize that mobile devices show up. Now, I switched my website over to a mobile-friendly design when the number of people that were hitting my site reached 10%. And some people said, well, that's a really small number. Only 10% of your people are mobile? It's like, well, that means that 1 in 10 people are having a crappy experience on my website. Do you really want 1 out of every 10 visitors to hate being on your website? So that was a threshold that I felt for me was a reasonable amount of time, and a reasonable amount of people, rather, that I would respect their decision. If that many Opera users showed up, I would probably make my site more friendly to Opera users. But the 2 guys that use Opera that visit my site have had no trouble at all with my site. And I really like both of them. They're very nice gentlemen. Sorry, you can't come up into this area of Europe and not pick on Opera. I love Opera, though. So this is Phil's site with the viewport set, right? So just zoomed in a little bit, and that's nice. So what you can do, though, is fix it on the client. You can optimize it for the current device, and it requires less duplication of effort. I want to show you some techniques with CSS3 that you can do to make this happen. There's a big problem, though. Depends on how big of a problem it is. When you do use some of the techniques I'm going to show you, which is you're going to change the flow of the site so that it will look great on mobile, but it doesn't actually recognize yet that you're on a mobile device. It thinks about screen size. That's the primary thing that CSS3 and media queries allow you to do. It says, here's the CSS I want you to use for a tablet, and here's the CSS I want you to use for a phone. But that's less interesting from the fact that I'm on the Edge network here. If you guys remember that. I'm living in 1993, and I have an iPhone 4, but I'm on 1993 bandwidth. And we've got LTE and things like that. So if I visit my blog, I'm going to get this lovely mobile site with these 1 megabyte PNG screenshots that are completely not respecting the fact that I'm on a mobile data plan overseas. So not only is it inefficient usage of bandwidth, but it doesn't even consider that there's differences in the mobile and the desktop. This is an example of a really crappy design that I saw when I gave this talk in Russia. This is just basically a massive site that scrolls down forever, but it assumes you're on a 1280 system. It doesn't even assume 1024. So you end up kind of zooming around like you're like a little magnifying glass as you wander around on their site. It's just awful. But given that it's columns of text, it would really lend itself to a mobile redesign. I hired a designer to work on my site which, by the way, I mean, seriously, love your designers. Give them hugs. Because if you're a programmer who thinks you can design, you probably can't. And one of the funny things is that I designed my first website, and I thought it was great. And I was patting myself on the back. And then I had a designer, and I paid him like actual money. And this is another important thing. Pay your designers actual money. Don't ever say, oh, well, you'll get lots of exposure, and I'll put a link to you at the bottom. They don't like that. So I saved up and gave him an actual sack of money. It was a burlap sack of cash. And he designed, and then after he designed it, all these people came out and were like, your site sucked before. I was like, it was like that for like 6 years and you never said anything. Well, I didn't want to say anything because I knew that you had done that, But the second I had an actual person who knew what they were doing design it, they were like, oh man, it's so much better. I would always visit your website and I would throw up in my mouth. It's like, really? Thanks. Thank you. Okay, so I'm running at 1024, okay? So in order to simulate a larger screen, I have zoomed out, okay? So don't worry about that, the fact that you can't see that. That's not representative of my site. I have zoomed out to pretend we are on a large screen. Now, if you notice up here at the top, there are some menus, okay? And then there's this right-hand rail. This is where I sell out and I have like ads and stuff. Now, if I start resizing this, see how things pop? There's a breakpoint at 1024 right there. And my face disappears and the whole right rail disappears. Now I'm going to make this normal sized. There's normal size. Okay, so this is the design at the normal size. Watch the orange menus as they get squished. Where did they go? Well, they turned into a drop-down using an HTML tag that no one ever uses called opt group. The most useful HTML tag, but no one ever uses it. Like, find an HTML person at work and test them and see if they know how to use opt group without looking it up. What I did is I took that UL, that unordered list. It was menu item, 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 and menu title, and item, item. And then I just took the ones that were that top menu and turned it into an option group. So those are actually unclickable. See? These are clickable and those aren't. And I do that dynamically. That way I didn't have to rewrite that all the time. If I change my menu, it automatically does that. And what's cool about this is that if you go and visit this on an iPhone, or on an Android phone or on a Windows phone, I'm using a native control. It seems like a small thing, but why would you want to use a native control? People are always doing owner draw, custom CSS for a drop-down menu. Well, there's a perfectly good drop-down menu that already works. Why not use that? I really think that when you do mobile designs, you should consider the fact that they've optimized things like that. So I'm just going to visit that real quick on this phone here, and we'll see. This will probably cost me about $45 to do this demo right now. Thank you, AT&T. And if I click on the drop-down, I get the little Apple drop-down right there. And it looks like it on Android, and it looks like what it's supposed to look like on a Windows phone. I like that. I'm a big fan of native controls. I could have done an owner draw. I'll give you an example of what an owner draw site looks like. We took the ASP.NET website, which is like our portal for ASP.NET developers. And this is where our forums and stuff are. And we've got this menu at the top. And when I make it really small, it hits a breakpoint, and it becomes responsive. This is called responsive or adaptive design. You see this right here? If I click on that, we get this drop-down. That's I say owner draw, totally custom divs and stuff. We did it that way, and I didn't have a lot of feedback, but I personally am not a fan of that. Native controls give people a much more friendly experience in Android. People feel like you care about them more. Not that you shouldn't, I'm just saying. So the media query is really, really easy. And if you know CSS, this is another example where you can go and pull something like this off in a day. This is really great. One of the themes that is going to go through all of my talks, and especially this one, is that these techniques are so simple that you could tell your boss that it would take a week. And you could just say, I really need to work from home. And you could go home for like a week. And you only have to write like that little bit of code, and then you can come back and like, oh man, it was so hard, so hard. Here we're just saying, well, I'm going to have a media query here for the screen, and when things are at the max width of 1024, and you can set it any way that you want, use the CSS that's inside of that block. It's cascading style sheets, and in this case, we're cascading based on size. So the simplest possible thing you could do right now is say display : none, and apply that to your right-hand rail, and just make it disappear. I'm not saying that that's the ideal design and we should all do that, but I'm just saying, like, just to prove the point, you could show your boss, like, look, it disappears, and they go, oh, that's great, go make it even better. There's a really great website for inspiration. It's called Media Queries. It's one of these ones where they took over someone's top-level domain. So in this case, it was Spain. So it's not mediaqueries.com, it's mediaquery.es, because that's the cool thing to do. Like Flickr, the short code for Flickr is like FLIC.KR. They registered it in Korea. Whatever, I think it's kind of weird. Media Queries is a website, and this is an inspirational website. It is literally just a list of cool websites that change based on their size. And this is kind of the standard way for a designer to express to you what your media query will look like. They have these breakpoints: desktop, narrow, tablet, and then phone. And some of them are really, really interesting. You can see, like, in this example, we've got a huge categories menu. They completely change the layout of the books from being left to right to being top to bottom. Categories menu gets squished, the books end up in a row, and then here, categories turns into a drop-down on a phone. And there are dozens and dozens of really, really cool ones. Some where they'll change the flow, some where they'll change menus, some where the entire site changes, based entirely on media queries. Here's one where they actually don't show a picture of this friendly guy because it's going to use up too much bandwidth. And you look for an IDE that has really good support for CSS. This is some of the support that we've got for CSS in Visual Studio, where is it going to play here? My little movie didn't play? No? Did it play once and then stop? So this is what happens. You go and you make a fancy slide with a movie that plays in the background, and it just doesn't even do anything. That's just sad. Nope. Forget you, PowerPoint. You suck. You're going to make me actually do the work. So now I'm going to say Media tab. That was what that movie was for, to express to you that amazing snippet. Isn't that powerful? Yay, PowerPoint. Now, there are a lot of really cool existing templates that you can apply. Now, the hardcore designer will go and do this stuff themselves. But if you're insisting on doing something yourself, one of the websites that I recommend is called Get Skeleton. And they have a mobile boilerplate that's for responsive designs. What they do is they've set up this grid layout. It's like a 960 grid, and you just take your divs and apply them, and then they'll automatically handle the responsive design for you, automatically resizing your stuff. So for websites like my podcast, where I actually haven't got a designer to look at it yet, I just use skeleton, and it automatically resizes. So that's an easy way to do things on the client. You want to adapt with those changing screen sizes. Now, if you were a business that had a product catalog, you're going to have some issues with your images. And your images are going to be big, and they're going to get downloaded, but they're still not going to, they're still going to cost the person a lot of bandwidth. So for example, this screenshot here is a big PNG. And if I resize at a breakpoint right about there, you see how I changed the wrapping in the CSS, so I dropped all the text down. And then as I get smaller, you see how that squishes? So this works really nicely, but have I really changed the size of that image? There's specific CSS to resize that, and I even have specific CSS to do resizing of YouTube, which is one of the things that people very rarely do. It's a little attention to detail trick. You can actually apply CSS and reach into the iframe and resize the person's YouTube. And I've got examples of how to do that on my blog. But what would have been the ideal thing to do? This is just a blog. No one reads this. What if it were like the IKEA catalog or something, and people were hitting this like millions and millions of times a day, and I've got these giant graphics that represent a product? What I should do is I should sniff on the server side what the size of the screen is. I should have a database that says, oh, it's a Nokia whatever, and it has a screen that's this big, and I should send them specifics of a certain size of graphic. For big images, that would be really important. You also want to make sure that you think about things like retina displays. This image here was done as a retina display, so I've actually got 2 versions of that logo. And I use CSS not just to look at the size of the screen, but also the pixel density. Because you've probably done this before with a newer iPhone. You visit a site and then you see that the graphics look a little jaggy. It's because they're taking a graphic that's 100 by 100 and they're making it go 400 by 400 and it looks jaggy. You can actually detect that in CSS and then apply high-resolution graphics to it, which is another thing to be thinking about. Those little bits of polish are going to become more and more important because we can see with the iPhone there's different sizes of screen, there's different densities of screen, and now we're going to have 7-inch and 10-inch and all this stuff. Screen density, screen sizes needs to become something that you think about. But at some point, you reach the limit of what you can do by just rearranging CSS. There's only so much you can do with clever design. Maybe you're doing a polling application or a data entry application, and you really want it to look like a mobile app. At some point, your website now wants to become a web application. Perhaps you're going to use something like PhoneGap, and you're going to try to make an app and put it in the store. And you want it to look like something. Well, you can fix it on the server, and you can send back custom mobile views. And jQuery Mobile is a popular example. It's the example that I'll use. But also things like Kendo UI and Sencha. There's lots of different ones. The point is, if you haven't played with mobile style sheets or mobile frameworks, don't make your own. It seems really silly to say that because I feel bad that I even need to say that. But it is amazing how many people who are doing something like a product catalog for IKEA, but insist on writing their own mobile framework when that's not even what their business is. There are super, super smart people who have solved these problems and are constantly trying to solve these problems. So I would seriously encourage you not to write your own mobile framework. Use someone else's. I don't care if it's jQuery Mobile. Pick someone else's. Especially when it comes to things like those graphic sizes. I had given you the example a moment ago about sniffing the browser and then sending back a resized graphic that would use less bandwidth. Soon there's a lot of talk about the HTML spec and changing it either in HTML or in CSS3 so that you could somehow detect and know what the bandwidth is and have a low source tag. I'm not sure if anyone here is old enough to remember that. That was one of the great tags of the early 90s. You say image, source, whatever, and then you remember this one? It's a shame. We actually stopped using that tag, and this is now when we finally need that tag. Low source would give you the low res version because this is back when GIFs would come in one line at a time. So you would send like a black and white, dotted version, and that would come in low source, and then later on you'd bring back the color one. That's officially in the spec, and no one supports it for any reason. And now we're trying to figure out how to do things with low bandwidth situations. It's kind of a shame. So if you fix it on the server, you get the maximum amount of flexibility. You can send people custom views that are specifically organized for their devices. Unfortunately, though, it can be a little bit repetitive because if you're doing things in either Rails or in MVC, you might end up with multiple sets of views. So you might have product views mobile and product views tablet and product views for the desktop. Also, device detection is difficult. If you do it in the general sense, if you're trying to hit iPhone and Android, then you can get 90% of people. But if you're really serious about doing device detection, then you need to get a company and buy their database. A company that I like out of England is called 51 Degrees, and they sell a device database, and they have all the details about if it really matters and you want to hit everyone, like does this device support MP3s or transparent PNGs, and exactly how wide is the screen, all the little details about that device. So let's take a website that sucks and make it suck less. I don't even know if that's needed. I forgot about that. I'm going to go ahead and comment that out because that looks scary. All right, so this is a silly little conference website. And it's a desktop version of the site. And I've got like, browse by date, browse by speaker. I can click on a speaker and then see a table that shows the things that that speaker is talking about. And then I can click on the tag and then see the sessions by tag. So it's kind of a cube of data. This is real common in anything, whether it be a product catalog or a speaker list. I can go by person, by category, by date, by room, and spin this cube around. Now, if I were going to take this, though, and put it into a mobile device, this is a thing called the Electric Plum Mobile Studio, electricplum.com. These guys are awesome. And they have an iPhone simulator for the PC that uses a custom version of Chromium to simulate an iPhone, and it also supports things like geolocation and stuff. You can see that this site sucks pretty badly, and there's no amount of pinching that's going to save me here. This just sucks. I mean, it's usable, but it's embarrassing, right? So if that's a lousy experience, what are some things that we could potentially do with that? Well, in this case, I'm going to use ASP.NET MVC, and I've brought in a thing called jQuery.mobile.mvc. It's a package. We use a thing called NuGet. It's like gems for .NET, and we bring in jQuery mobile, and it drops in this new layout. So this layout that I've got here is called layout.mobile. This is like a master page. Here's my main page for my desktop site. It brings in jQuery. Here's the exact same thing, except it's layout.mobile. So the only thing that's changed is the file name. There's no config files or anything. And we've got a mobile CSS bundle there. This is a bundle of all the different CSS and all the different JavaScript that we need to make this look nice. And I've also got jQuery mobile over here. So here's my jQuery, and where's my, oops, now I've just broken, oh, that was a horrible thing. What have I done? I've just drugged something from one place to the other. Well, we'll see if this works. There's no undo when you make a mistake that badly. Oh, this is going to be fun for all of us. Oh, sweet, sweet, merciful Lord. What has happened? You think I dragged packages into models? Oh my God, we're all going to die. Did I really? No? Wow. Let's just all pause for a second and panic, shall we? Okay, how will Scott handle this? Dun, dun, dun. Ah, that would imply I was using source control, which would have required thought and thoughtfulness on my part. No, my source control consists of these zip files, sir. But I respect that you think that highly of me that I would have source control. This is where the whole thing goes horribly, horribly wrong. Oh, no. Okay, so that's something. Okay. Dun, 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 freaking out. Yeah, okay, I'm just going to move a little slower. And this is probably going to be just a train wreck. Go ahead and push stop on the video that we're recording now because there's no way that this is going to go well for anyone. And then he fell over. Ooh, I could totally be like, I'm diabetic. Oh no, I feel sick. I could totally use that. Can I get some juice, please? I think that would probably be rude to do that. All right. You think so? All right. Duh. Okay. So this here is the same thing, except with a slightly different layout. Let's go ahead and make sure we prove what exactly just happened here. I'm going to add some text just to prove the point. Okay? Now, that does not appear over here. Okay? So what we've done is we've got a totally different layout that is happening, except the body is being rendered with the existing stuff. Does that make sense? So just by virtue of the fact that it's mobile, the layout has changed, except the center part there still comes from the same place. In this case, it's coming from index. This is some text. Refresh and refresh. So I have a mobile layout, but I have the same partial view that's happening inside. And that might be okay, that might be acceptable, but it might also be slightly cheesy. If I brought in some navigation, like this, oops, that's not navigation. Bring in some navigation, because I'm not going to spend too much time typing, because I think you believe me that I can type. Well, maybe with this performance, you probably don't believe that I can type. But still, let's just assume for a second that I've been coasting on charm for the last 20 years of my career. And, well, I kind of have. But, yeah, and he can barely type, and I'm so I drop that menu in, and it basically looks crappy on both devices. So, achievement. But what I could do is I could apply these little data hyphen annotations. And this is a thing that is unique to jQuery Mobile. I kind of like it. Some layout systems have CSS classes that you should remember. So you would say div class equals something mobile-y, and you would get a mobile experience. But what these guys do is they say, well, this is going to have the role of a list view. So this unordered list has the role of being a list view. And just by virtue of that fact, they will detect that and they will show something different. But I don't really want that for my desktop. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to take that away. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to bring in a custom mobile view. That way I'll use jQuery Mobile in one place and not in the other. So here I am totally the desktop, okay? And then I've got index mobile. And that index.mobile is actually index.some magic string. I'll show more about that in a second. So here I've got I am totally the desktop, and over here we've got an actually halfway decent looking menu. And you notice how it inherited that style just by virtue of the fact that it had that data hyphen. In fact, I can change that theme, they're called themes, by going into the layout. And it says here, data theme A. You can go and download different themes and change the look and feel of it. Now, in this case, it still looks like jQuery Mobile, but you can theme that however you want. Your designer can create a jQuery Mobile theme. If you go to the Rolex site at m.rolex.com, that whole site is actually jQuery Mobile, but it doesn't look like jQuery Mobile. It totally looks like the Rolex brand. So unfortunately, jQuery Mobile has become so popular that people will just use the default theme. And then you go to the site and you go, yeah, that's jQuery Mobile. It's like Java default buttons, or like back in the day, Borland had like the little green checkbox on their OK button, and you wrote that in Borland, hee hee. So you should put a little work into your theme and try to make it match. So use the things that are good about it, but then change the look and feel so it matches what you're trying to accomplish. So here, just by virtue of the fact that it's called .mobile, it's picking up that stuff. Now I can go into that home page and start moving myself around, but I really want to switch back into desktop view because I might want to be able to do the debugging on a desktop machine or see desktop on mobile. So I've got this view switcher, and I can click on that view switcher. And now I've got desktop on mobile, because sometimes you want to be able to do that. But here I am now on the desktop, and I have no way to get back. Right? So why is that? Well, this view switcher is a partial view, and these are real common on sites like this. I want to make sure that that exists on the main layout as well, so that when I'm on the desktop, I've got a way to switch back. So I'm going to drop that into the desktop and come back over here. And now I say displaying desktop, and I can switch back and forth. And that mobile view is just super simple. All it's doing here is it's saying, if it's a mobile device, can you switch back and forth between mobile view? And it just sets a little cookie. But this is an interesting line here. If it's a mobile device. So what does that mean to my application here? Here I'm in desktop mode, and I can see a view switcher, but over here on the desktop browser I can't. Maybe I want to debug that. So I'm just going to comment that out. So I don't care whether it's a mobile device or not. I want to make that work for anything. So now I can do the debugging of my mobile site using my Chrome tools or whatever I want, and then later I could switch that back and forth. So that's kind of nice. So we switch back to mobile view, and then we'll go and look at something like the list of speakers. So here we are again with a mobile layout, except it inherited that desktop speaker view. The list of speakers is pretty basic. We go look at speakers. All it's doing is it's saying for each speaker. It's not anything particularly fancy. But I could take that all speakers and make that mobile as well. And all I'm going to do to make it mobile, in fact, is just add this data role list view. So it's actually identical to before. And hit F5, and now I've got an attractive looking site. So at this point, your boss is starting to become suspicious that maybe you're spending too much time working from home and you're doing all the easy stuff. So he's going to give you something really complicated. And he might say, this is great, good job with the mobile site, but I really want type ahead, searchability, so I can start typing and have it filter the site and all that kind of stuff. This is where you say, oh, wow, yeah, I'm going to have to probably re-architect some Java, JSON, internet, XML. You just got to make him confused, all right? And then you go in and you go like this. But when you do that, you have to leave for like 3 days. And don't ever let him see the source code. And if your boss is like my boss and he reads the check-in mail, then you're screwed. This only works if he's like a suit, or if she doesn't code. So that's all, and that's all client side. Then you get that for free, that data filter, which is pretty nice. So at that point, then I could click over to something like this. There's my sessions. And I could go through each of these and update them. And in all these cases, I'm just adding these little list views. And this is a kind of a contrite example, but it actually works pretty well. Here's a little more complicated example where, let's look at dates. So if I back out of here, and we'll go back to, we got speaker, we got tags, nice lists. These are really, jQuery mobile is really good for little data cubes like this. And then if we hit date, right, and that kind of looks crappy. I could just make that a list of dates, but it would be nicer to put a little bit more thought into it and use some of the features of the framework. And every framework is different, but one of the things that I like about jQuery mobile is this list divider. So all I've done here is said it's a data role, list view, for each date, and then each time I see the day change, I'll insert a list divider. Just insert a divider, and that way it doesn't look so sloppy. So instead of like this, so it looks like that. And then again, you can experiment with your themes. Let's go back to a theme and see if there's one that works for you, and then you can go and download themes. There you go. So that's a nice looking theme. So now I can move around and see now I've got here. And this is an example where a table made sense on the desktop. I'm not a CSS type person, but if it's a table, you should probably be allowed to use the table tag. Because sometimes the CSS designer guys are like, hey man, you know how to use a div. They talk like that, the CSS guys. Don't use a table. Every time you use a table, you kills a kitten, man. And I'm like, even for tabular data? Yeah, man, the tables are bad. Well, tables are kind of useful on the desktop, but okay, that's cool. We'll come up with another solution then. So here we've got a table of sessions here. What we can do is we can have tabular style data by using some basic semantic tags. And this is what's nice about really good mobile sites, mobile frameworks rather, is that notice that there's nothing fancy here. It's just li, an anchor, h3, p, and strong. No fancy stuff going on. HTML really is secondary. It provides only basic structure. What's nice about this is a couple things. We're using the semantic tags like h3. Strong means something. And also notice this href is wrapping the entire thing. So that whole thing is going to become an anchor. And if we come back over here, let's find a more interesting slot with more stuff going on. That's lunch. That's not interesting. That's not interesting. There you go. So I've taken that table and really changed it. It's not a table anymore. It's a list, and we've got the H3 is the title of the session, and then the strong is the speaker. And we can move around a little bit cleaner. And anytime you add an href, you get this familiar moving forward metaphor. So far we've got date, we've got speaker, and then it looks crappy here. We'll go ahead and we'll switch that one as well. That's the main session. And notice how I'm not even having to recompile to do this kind of stuff, because I'm actually using the same back-end controllers. I wanted to make sure that the information that was sent to the view, that view model, was shared between desktops. Now, in some instances, when you're making mobile sites, not everything's going to fit on one page like that. And you might have to have a custom back-end controller that's going to split things up, particularly in situations where you have like a wizard, or you're going to pick some date or fill out a large form. But for the most part, for basic sites and for data entry sites like this, or data cube visiting sites, you can do this with one back-end logic and then just different views. So in this case, I've not only come up with a page that uses the existing model, but I've added links to move around. So I can keep moving forward. I can keep going through tags, and I can keep going through speakers. So I've put together a mobile site with minimal amount of effort. But this isn't offline, though. I couldn't put this in PhoneGap or put this in the store because it requires a connection to the internet, which I might not necessarily want, especially if I'm at a conference like this where I don't have internet all the time. So let's see if we can do the whole thing again, except on a single page. So what we're going to do here is, rather than a whole bunch of views like that and a lot of navigation, we're going to use Knockout. Knockout is this kind of lovely model view model, client-side binder. So that index page actually contains all other views on one page. So instead of navigating from view to view, every view exists on the same page at the same time. I've taken list by date and list by speaker and all that stuff, and I'm inserting them there and then just hiding them. So they're always on the page, but you can't see them. The convention I'm using is an underscore in front of stuff that are partial. So there's the one that we saw before. This is all speakers, except rather than it using server-side code, it's using client-side code with Knockout. So data-bind is Knockout, and data-role is jQuery. So we're saying we're going to bind to each speaker. And remember that we have this cube of data. We have a list of sessions, we have speakers and tags and dates, and we want to be able to kind of query our way around this data set. How do we get that data set onto the client, and then how do we move around it? Well, the data set and the controller has changed. So now, instead of doing all of those queries and all of that where this and where that on the server, we're just taking the entire data set and returning it as JSON. I talked a little bit about this in the keynote. If your data set's not that big, if it's only a couple thousand records, send it all over. Send it all over. Why the heck not? So that's going to be sent all the way over there. And then I can do things like for each speaker where the data binding is occurring in JavaScript on the client side using Knockout. Okay? But the best part is this. We just apply those bindings. They all happen at one time. We do the get on line 14 where we go and say, get all that data. But what if you're offline? What if you're offline? How's that going to work? Well, HTML5 lets you have a cache manifest. And a cache manifest is different from the HTTP caching that you're familiar with. It's literally a manifest, a bill of lading, a list of all the things that you would really wish that the browser kept local. So here's a list of all that stuff that we want local, including on line 23 there, home/all data, the JSON itself. So if we're offline, it will use the cached JSON. Okay? That manifest gets downloaded. It works in Chrome, and it works in, I think it works in the iPhone. So then the navigation gets hooked up as click events. And all that does is change the view on the model. And you're going to see the hashes occur in the browser. So here's the exact same thing. We'll use Chrome. Now watch this URL here. See how we're moving around? We've actually never left that home page. We only downloaded the one page, we downloaded the one data set, and we get to move around that cube. And then I could pull the cable and keep moving around because I'm using the HTML5 cache manifest. So that's kind of a really cool technique that one could use to put together a data application that's mobile and also offline. Also, you can get themes like I talked about in jQuery Mobile that look nothing at all like jQuery Mobile. This is a really weird one. This actually is a Windows Phone 7 theme for jQuery Mobile. So what you could potentially do is if you have an application, or maybe applications in the marketplace that are for multiple devices, you have an Android app, you have a Windows Phone app, you have an iPhone app, but part of that application is online. The About page or the feedback page, rather than that feeling like they've left the phone and gone somewhere else, it could look like the phone that they're on. So you could write a jQuery Mobile page that would do the kinds of things you wanted, whether it be surveys or data entry or whatever, and then if they have a Windows phone, you drop in the theme, and it's all CSS, and it looks like the phone that they're on. So rather than looking like jQuery Mobile, it looks like an iPhone or an Android phone or a Windows phone, and it makes your application more dry. You're not repeating yourself because you're just swapping out themes based on the kind of phone that you have, which is pretty sweet. So, of course, the approach that you choose is all dependent on the type of app that you're building. And are there any web forms people in the room? No? Okay, well, I won't have to show that demo. There's one guy? You call me later, dude. So a lot of people are saying, well, I don't want to be able to do, I want to be able to do all of the same stuff, except I need to be able to do it on web forms. You can do mobile on web forms too. It's called ASP.NET Friendly URLs, and it's up on NuGet right now. I'll just show you very, very briefly what that looks like. So here, people are used to seeing .aspx in the URL, and they would rather not see that. So we'll just say /foo, and it automatically picks it up. So if you have a foo.aspx, it just becomes foo. If you have a foo or a bar, it becomes foo_bar, whatever. In this case here, I can go somewhere like this, foo/bar/34, and that's actually the foo.aspx page, and then I can just pull the friendly URL segments out. So web forms developers can do this kind of stuff. And then I can add a mobile view switcher. So not only do I get friendly URLs, but by virtue of that fact, I can switch over to mobile. The URL is the same, but now I'm using a mobile view, and it all uses that same convention, foo and foo.mobile. Now, I've used this .mobile as an example a number of times, but it's really important to point out that mobile doesn't mean anything. It's just some token. I can go down in here and change the display mode. Here I could say, I want a new display mode, WP7, and I want that used anytime the user agent has Windows Phone. So if I wanted an iPhone-specific thing, I would just say, I would just say, iPhone, and then I would go and have index.iPhone and layout.iPhone. Then what gets you thinking about the idea of these display modes, they don't even have to be specific to mobile. You could have gold, silver, and platinum. You could have tablet. It doesn't have to be mobile. It could be based on the user, because the context condition in this case, I'm just saying user agent, I could look at cookies, I could look at language, I could switch any way that I wanted to. If I were doing stuff in Arabic, I could have index.right-to-left.cshtml and use the display mode to switch in that as well. I could have custom things for blind people if I detect a screen reader. It's not mobile specific, but it's all server-side. So these are some of the thinking that we've got right now around mobile, and if you go up to my blog and click on posts by category, I've got a whole mobile section where I talk about this stuff, examples of how to take existing sites, move them over, and thank you very much for your time and your attention.